I'd cover 3 months' rent. Pack a bag, grab a coffee. Down the road they went. And if they ask, I'd tell them it was God who sent. If I had a better car, my brother, I'd drive through the night. Feel like somewhere in the country, if that'd make everything alright. If that'd make everything alright.
This is Uneducated, and we are here on Thursday night with Marshall Olson. Brandon is actually on the road coming from Akron, so he should be here in just a little bit. And so we're glad that you're joining us tonight. Just real quick, a couple things to think about if you are joining us tonight. If you have not subscribed and you've been watching the channel for a while, make sure that you do subscribe, because it does help us gain some stuff on YouTube. And then also it gives you some perks as far as it's easier to find us. And you can click the bell and make sure you have your notifications on, and that way when we go live to a live stream, you'll be notified. And so tonight we're going to continue our conversation from last week concerning the Jews and the modern day Jews specifically, and whether or not those modern day Jews have descended from Canaanites, and whether or not that makes a difference when it comes to salvation, God's salvation plan, God's redemption plan, and what does that maybe even mean for us to evangelize, or even to talk to people who may or may not be descended from the Canaanite clan in the Old Testament Scripture. So Marshall has been with us. He was with us last week, and so Marshall, it's good to have you back again tonight.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Yeah. So Marshall, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna open it up and just let you kind of give us some background information, because last week we got into some deep weeds and we talked about some good concepts, but we were kind of all over the map. And so I want you to just give us some foundation, maybe like, I don't know, 5 to 7 minutes, and then we can jump in and talk about it. But give us some foundation of some of the history of some of the ideas of this Canaanite clan and the curse and some of the things you want to talk about. And then when you do that, then maybe I'll just throw some things off you and we'll kind of go back and forth. And then maybe when Brandon gets here, we'll have some other discussion with that as well. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
All right, cool.
Could we skip to on the page 8 of the PowerPoint too, if you don't mind?
Yeah, let me run up there.
And then maybe we.
Where are we at? Right here?
Yeah, right. Yep, that one right
there. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
And then that very first, you may have to. Does it not have it doesn't have it where you can click into it, does it? Oh wait, yeah, it does. Okay, perfect.
I could click this. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
You want me to click that first one?
Yeah. Yep, that would be great. So basically.
So that's just taking me to I ask.
Yeah, and then if you scroll down, like, because I already asked,
I see.
I already like kind of put the question and then linked the whole deal to
okay.
it. So
Gotcha.
And then basically what this is covering, this site is Ask AI. It's so I don't know if you ever did any research online or not, but in the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years or so, they've I don't know if it's just by chance or on purpose, intentional, or if it would just, just happens, but it's very hard to find information. So what's nice about these new AI tools is if you type in a question, it takes about 15 or 20 seconds to find the answer for you.
Right.
And then it completely pulls up all kinds of information on the topic in a nice little summation format. So basically, recently, studies provided compelling evidence that modern Jewish populations, particularly those in Israel, share a significant amount of their ancestry with the ancient Canaanites. This has been established through extensive DNA analysis of skeletal remains from archaeological sites in Levant, which includes present-day Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon. They go through the findings of the DNA analysis. May 2020, that started with 93 individuals. Researchers found that more than half the ancestry of contemporary Jewish groups and Arabic-speaking populations can be traced back to the ancient Canaanites who inhabited the region during the Bronze Age between 35,000 and 1200 BC. 3500 and 1200 BC. It kind of goes on to the research team.
Okay. So let me ask you a quick question. Then last week we talked a little bit about the Canaanites and where they came from.
Yes.
And so if you go back to chapter 10 in the Table of Nations in Genesis, and then you go back to Noah and his 3 sons. So his son Ham, who uncovered saw his father's nakedness in the tent, a curse was placed on him, and from the line of Ham comes what we know as the Canaanite people. Am I correct?
Yes.
Are we on the same page?
Yeah, the Canaanites were. I mean, that's the thing too. Is that whole the curse of Canaan in that chapter of Genesis, chapter 10. There is, I mean, a deep study into those. I think it's 3 or 4 paragraphs long. How it describes a curse. It's it's really weird because obviously the modern, like the world, or wants you to just to think like, oh well, Noah was looked upon while he was passed out drunk naked, and then that's where this curse originated from. But a deeper study into especially what's wild is so it labels Canaan rather. In one paragraph, it says that he's the brethren or the brothers of Shem and Japheth.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the next paragraph, it says that Shem and Japheth are Canaan's uncles. So I always found it weird, because when are you someone's uncle and brother at the same time? You know what I mean? Then there would have to be some sort of ancestral act that occurred if you were someone's brother and uncle. You know what I mean? A brother uncle, if you will. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened, but I mean, the whole area right there, it's still, I mean, where are we 3,000 years later? And there's not a whole lot of like research and study, even in the, it's not even settled, because obviously there's a lot of a gray area and obscurity around these Canaanite people because they've went to a great extent to hide their existence.
Okay, so I guess I'm just trying to real quick here as you're talking about that. I'm trying to go back to Genesis chapter 9 and see what you're referring to. I don't remember them being called brethren and then being called the uncles of him, unless it's possible that his descendants, like Cain's descendants, then obviously Cain's brothers would be referred to as, if Cain's descendants, then his descendants would, the brothers of Cain would be their uncle. Yes. If that makes sense. And I guess what I'm trying to work through here as we're working through this is, so what makes the Canaanites different people than Shem and Ham and all the people, other than the curse? And if you read the curse in Genesis chapter 9, the curse is that they would serve, his people, Cain's people, would serve. The curse was that he would serve his brothers. Yeah, it doesn't say that they were corrupt in some horrible way, that they would be deemed, that they were unsalvageable or anything like that. It's just clearly that they would serve his brothers.
Well, the slave of slaves, I believe it was.
What's that?
Wasn't it worded slave of slaves?
Well, yeah, even that, though, that's the concept would be then that they would be, but that even a slave in Jewish time could be redeemed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm trying to take this back, because I know that ultimately your findings, Marshall, are, what you're seeing here in modern day is they're taking DNA samples and they're finding that there are, the blood type that's in the modern day Jewish person is similar or has connections to the Canaanites. And I guess what I want to do is I want to trace that back, and I want to understand if your thought is that there is some kind of hybrid human race known as the Canaanites, or if the Canaanites just come from the human race and they were under a curse, which meant that they would be slave of slaves or they would serve their brothers.
Well, it doesn't really get into that so much in that chapter, but I think as far as like the condemning of the Canaanite, is that what you're referencing? Like as far as like why I feel like it comes down to that, and I would have to say it's not so much in that chapter 9, chapter 10 of Genesis, but later on as these Canaanitic tribes actually, there is still this Nephilim presence after the flood.
And, okay, yeah, I would agree that there's this Nephilim presence after the flood. However, we're not given specifically where the Nephilim came from. So some of that we could go back to Enoch and maybe some other lost books and get some information. But we don't really know if there was some kind of spiritual connection, like in Genesis chapter 6, where the sons of God came down and had sex with the daughters of men. So we don't know if that happened again, or some people believe that there was some kind of manipulation with the genetic code or the DNA. And but again, I'm not sure that the Canaanites are necessarily talked about as terrible people because they were Nephilim necessarily, but they were looked at upon God as being terrible, wicked people because they were sacrificing children and their sexual practices were very immoral. So there was a lot of sinful wickedness going on. And I guess I'm trying to get back to the root, which we talked about last week a little bit. So as we trace back these Canaanites and as you talk about the curse, I just want to keep bringing it to the forefront and ask the question, because I guess my issue is that I don't think the Canaanites are bad because of their bloodline. I think they're wicked because of their choices to sin and rebel against God. And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you're saying that the Canaanites and any modern day people who would carry any kind of a bloodline with the Canaanites, that their wickedness or their separation from God is because of that genetic makeup. Am I incorrect in you thinking that way?
No, but I don't solely think that way.
Okay.
I think it's both. I think it's a symbiotic relationship that both of these things share, where because of that, like we all can sin,
Mm-hmm.
but for whatever reason, because of that, this Canaanitic DNA in them, they tend to, I don't know, I guess be a little bit more genetically predisposed to sin, I guess, and I'm just generally speaking.
Okay.
Because I mean, in a further, in a future podcast where we get into their modern day activities, because that's what we're gauging it from is their activities,
Okay. And maybe if we get, and I'll let you talk, because I know I'm just trying to make the connection. So I want you to share these things.
Yeah.
But maybe even if we get there some tonight, we could talk about that, because again, even when you look at the actions, whether it's the modern day Jew or whatever, see, I would argue that everyone, like the Bible clearly says that there is no one righteous, no one good. Everyone has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So I think we're all technically genetically disposed to evil because of sin.
For sure, but I mean, as far as like as a whole goes, I don't believe there's any other race on the planet imposturing as another, another people. You know what I mean? Like, and to look up in modern history, I mean, maybe it, or not modern, but throughout history, I mean, maybe it's happened before. Maybe like there's been this imposter nation or identity theft again throughout history. But, I mean, the bottom line is like, they're saying they're from Shem. You look it up, any modern day or any mainstream biblical site, it tells you that the Jews and the Abrahams came from Shem. But DNA proof contradicts that theory and proves that they did not come from Shem. They indeed came from Canaan. But, and then, for instance, when you're talking about their actions, like they were sacrificing kids and worshiping idols, well, they had to learn that from somewhere, and I know they didn't learn it from Yahweh,
Right.
So that, those teachings were passed down from the Nephilim or the fallen angels, and not, because not only were they corrupting the DNA, but they were also teaching them how to sin.
Right.
And how to profit from sin.
Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, because it appears that, according to Enoch, that in Genesis chapter 6, when they came down the first time for the first rebellion, in that sense, this first spiritual rebellion that they committed there, technically the second, the first one was in Eden. Mm-hmm. So the second one, it appears that according to Enoch, they did the same thing. They taught them sorceries. They taught them cutting of roots, which is the word pharmakia, where we get pharmacy from, and how to put on makeup and all these kind of perversions that God did not approve of. So they were teaching these things. So I don't necessarily disagree with you that they might have been teaching those things. I guess I'm still just trying to make that connection, because I could even go so far as to say there may be certain demonic entities that are part of a hybrid race of Nephilim that are walking the planet, causing problems in the world.
Yes.
But for me, that would be really hard to discern. And I guess we could discern based on wicked actions, but even wicked actions, we look at David. He was a murderer and an adulterer. Now, granted, he never turned away from the true God of Israel.
Yes.
He never worshipped other gods, so I get that part. But you also have Paul, who was a Pharisee among Pharisees, and yet, same thing, he never turned away necessarily. So we could deem certain people that way.
Well, he was a Pharisee, but was he not a Judean, though?
Well, yeah, he would have been. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that made him like a true Israelite, then, correct? Not.
Well, according to the ethnic, yeah. So here's the neat thing, Marshall, too, that I would like to throw out, and this would take a lifetime for us to walk through. But in John chapter 8, when Jesus is having this discussion with the Pharisees, he clearly tells them that they think that their father is Abraham. However, he says, because of the things you're doing, and you're trying to kill me, and your fathers killed the prophets, your actions are showing that your father is the devil. Mm-hmm. And so he said, if you were actually the children of Abraham, you would not be trying to kill me. Now, he didn't say that necessarily they were, unredeemable, but yet at the same time, he was saying, like you're getting to, their actions were proving that they were choosing to rebel against the God of Israel, the true God of Israel, and that they were making themselves to be children of the evil one, or children of Satan.
Yes.
So I'm totally, I'm okay with calling, black and white. I mean, it's bottom line. That's who they were. I'm just wondering, though, like, the connection. So I want you to go a little further here and walk back through some history with me.
And that's definitely what I'm curious too. Is there a connection throughout biblical and modern history that connects these Canaanites to basically sin? I mean, you made a great point. They were trying to kill Jesus. Mm-hmm. He said he is the truth and the light and the way. So killing Jesus, is just, I'm kind of playing with words here, but it's killing the truth too, Right.
And so I guess my point was, though, like you made the comment that Paul, if he was a Pharisee, he would have been of the Judean race, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, as far as racial background of Paul was Judean, but as far as these other rabbinical Pharisees of the Sanhedrin, Jesus confronted that in John chapter 8, specifically like 32 through 44. he calls, now he calls him out, and he says, he from a murderer from the beginning. So he makes that connection to even Cain, because Cain was the first murderer. Cain committed the first act of murder. So I think Jesus himself, and almost like, were those Pharisees Jesus himself confronting? Were they, did that Canaanite kind of mongrelization of Israel and Canaan blood already take place? Like, did he know that the people he was talking to had like the facial features and like he knew like he was talking to Canaanites at that point, even though that they were coming off as these Judean Pharisees of the Sanhedrin. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, that's a potentiality that, I don't know the answer, yes or no. I don't think anyone does.
Okay.
But that's just one thing that it's one of those things that makes me question that is like, were these guys Canaanites? Is that why Jesus treated them so harshly? Just as in the same of Matthew, like in that where he confronts a Canaanite woman, like, yeah, he healed that Canaanite woman, but he still tells her straight up, like, healing you, helping you is like taking food off my family's table, which are the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and throwing it to the dogs. So, I mean, as a follower of Christ, when I read that, you can't help but to feel some sort of contradiction between what he says there to that Canaanite woman, and then how, like, later on, throughout the New Testament, how Jesus addresses people in general.
So, okay. So I hear what you're saying, but again, I think, like, for me, Marshall, and this is one of the things I really am strong on, and I want to work through, and that's the context.
Yes.
And so when you were talking about John, for instance, you brought up the idea, did Jesus see some kind of recognition in their facial features or whatever?
Or did he just know, because he knows everything, so he would know.
Right, but but I guess what I'm wondering is this, because a lot of times we come into the scriptures, well, not a lot of times, all of us come into the scriptures when we read them with presuppositions oftentimes.
Sure.
And we have to come to the text and let the text say what it's going to say. And there is absolutely nothing in the text that would give us any idea or inclination that Jesus was thinking about when he was calling them out as the fact that they were ethnically children of Abraham. So he was making it clear in the context that they were children of Abraham. However, they were not showing that they were children of Abraham, truly children of Abraham, because they were trying to kill him. So again, it was based on their action, not their DNA, not the fact that they were descended from some other clan of people. He clearly says, if your father was Abraham, this is how you'd be acting, but there's no indication that he's trying to say that they're a different race of people or a different DNA style. He's clearly talking about their actions. Would you disagree with that?
Well, and when it says if, like right where you just, I was about to ask that. Does it say definitively? Does Jesus claiming like, yes, you are in fact indeed children of Abraham,
Yeah.
or he's more saying, if you were children of Abraham, you wouldn't be acting the way you're acting.
Okay, but either way, because they are Pharisaical. Their ethnic background would be Jewish. No.
Yeah, the Judeans, but the merger, it came before the time of Christ. That's why there's that 400-year gap between the book of Malachi and the book of Matthew. Like, once in the Old Testament, once the Israelites failed to wipe those Canaanites out of it, or the Edomites, really, which, I mean, all those tribes, the Edomites, they're all Canaanitic tribes. Like, they all had something wrong with them. They were all denounced by God in one fashion or in the other in the Old Testament. And that's why the children of Israel made war with all of them, because they were all sinning in the most, and one, it even says, like, the Edomites, it says they were demon possessed, which is a pretty powerful claim. But
okay, so all right, so I just want to read real quick here. This is John chapter 8, verse 31. It says that Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed him, "If you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine." So he doesn't say anything about ethnicity here. He's talking about what they believe. If they continue in his word, then they're truly his students. Then they will know the truth, and then then that truth, which is Jesus Christ, which you said earlier, that is the truth that will make you free. And then it says, they answered him, we are Abraham's descendants and have never yet been enslaved to anyone. So how is it that you say you will become free? And Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. And so, Marshall, this is where I'm getting at this idea that, the biggest issue that people have is not, what race they come from or what tribe they come from. It's the fact that we have all committed sin according to Romans chapter 6. Verse 23. He says here in 35, the slave does not remain in the house forever. The son does remain forever. So if the son makes you free, you will be free indeed. So he's talking about himself there, that, he's the only one that can set you free. And then he says this in verse 37, I know that you are Abraham's descendants, yet you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. And remember earlier he said, if you keep my word. So I guess, Marshall, this has been my argument, and I'm not trying to argue with you that there isn't crossover in genetic DNA of people. I think we all have some kind of DNA in us that's probably not original. Because of the fact that we've been intermingled with so many different people groups. However, Jesus seems to be making it clear here that you can be of an ethnic background. You could be even of, royal background or whatever. It doesn't matter, or Abraham's background. He says specifically, you are. But he says, you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you, meaning they're not obedient to his word. That's what makes them makes them lost, and the only way they can be found is if they, believe in him and trust in his word and his truth.
Yes, through him. I actually just made a profound revelation as you read that chapter in John there. It straight up admits we're all slave to sin, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what does it say about the Canaanites? They're the slave of slaves, right? So, okay. I mean, maybe there's that reference. We're all slaves to sin. The Canaanites are the slave of slaves to sin.
Right. Well, you know what? That may be true. That may be a good reference because technically we're all enslaved to sin, and then you've got sinners enslaved to other sinners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, in a way, like you brought up for instance, like the pornography industry, and like, okay. Yeah, it's a sinful act to pull it up on your computer and watch it and partake in that. But who's making it so readily available that anyone could access it? Who's making the money off selling, like the production houses producing this smut and filth, you know what I mean? There's a group of individuals behind it all that are not only producing but profiting off of it, and with that money they in turn put it to politicians who write legislature to make it more easily accessible for children. Any kid can pull up their phone, unless their parent is smart enough to put a lock on it, any mobile device, and can immediately get into like hardcore pornography. And I know it wasn't Christians doing that. It wasn't Christians that signed those things off.
Right. No, brother, I am with you 100%. I don't agree with any of this garbage that's going on. And I think anybody who is taking part in that, whether they are on the side that's producing it or on the side that's watching it, they're going to be held accountable for their sin.
Yeah.
I mean, either way.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And that's in all, and that's in everything, and mm-hmm. like, that's what I mean. Like, it just would, like, it was so profound. Like, I've read the book of John multiple times, and mm-hmm. I'd never made that connection before until you just read it right now. Like, yeah, we're all slaves to sin.
Right. Right. And I guess that's why too, like last week in our discussion, like it's really hard for me to look at another human being and not see them as what God has called them, and they are supposed to be his imagers, but they're bound by sin. So I feel like, according to Jesus's Great Commission, that my calling now for the rest of my life, and every Christian's calling, is to go and make disciples, help other people become students of Jesus so that they can get into his word, they can know his truth, and then they can get free to the sin that is enslaving them and the sin that eventually is going to separate them from God forever.
Yes.
So that's my goal, and I think, in all honesty, I think that's your goal too.
Yeah, it is. And it just, I'm a very analytical person,
Right.
so,
Right.
and when I see, and what really started me on all this was this, like we talked about last week, was pretty much the definition of words and how definitions of words change. The definition of a word today isn't the definition of a word yesterday, and the definition of that same word tomorrow is going to be something different. Now, obviously, I'm making an analogy there, but that's pretty much how it goes. Like, I have an encyclopedia from the 30s, and there's words in there that you look it up, and then you look up the same word in the modern day encyclopedia. It's an entirely different definition.
Yeah, right.
And it's just a way to control the mind. The control, it's they have it down to a science, and so when I see that, it makes me question everything. And then when I've lived my whole life, and I've had debates with people, especially over the last 10 years, with like the advancements of like Epstein Island and all that stuff, and like the Jewish involvement and the Israeli Mossad ties into all that stuff, and the fact that the media is also completely, pretty much 99% owned by dual citizenship Israelis. Like it really makes you start to like question everything. Like, what is truth then?
Right. And again, I'm not we could go to some websites and try to pull up some information, but I'm not even I'm taking your word for that, and the reason I'm doing that is because some of the information that I've pulled up, I've seen the same thing.
Yeah.
So there is a huge Jewish population of people, again, but I guess my thought is that, like, to label the modern day Jewish people, I think there's a lot more than just the Jewish people that are involved in it. I think there's a lot of different types of people.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And that's what that's the thing, because I walk a fine line, because like, saying this stuff, it's easy to kind of pigeonhole the person talking about this stuff as like, this complete, like, far thinking type of person, politically, racially, whatever.
Right.
But it's because these are hard topics to talk about. But I'm just trying to come at it with like kind of a level-headed sense of biasy. Like, I'm not trying to condemn all Jews. Like, I'm just trying to point out the fact that, hey, these Canaanites, modern, like the Jews descended from Canaanites, that's new information to me. Most likely it's new information to everyone I tell it to, because we've been living our whole life under this consensus that they are descendants of the tribes of Israel, Right. So, and because their whole big claim, without that, what do they have? Nothing. They have nothing, just a long line of just atrocities and genocides,
Right.
over the last 80 years.
Right. No, and I'm telling you that, like I'm not here to push back on some of that stuff either, because when I look at whether it's the modern day nation of Israel and their antichrist stand, because they have not put their trust in Messiah, and so I do not believe that in that sense that they are saved or following Christ, but I do believe that they can be saved and they need Christ.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, I don't fall into that trap either, to think that it's okay. And I think we had a show probably about 2 months ago talking about the fact that, just because Israel says that they think something's good doesn't mean we say it's good just because they're Israel.
Yeah.
That's not not cool.
Well, not to mention too, the whole thing. Think about it. They took Palestine, and then they renamed it Israel, while claiming to be the descendants of Israel. So, and what it really does in the mind of, like, say you're just average American, and then they read the Bible and they're like, oh, the nations of the earth will rise up and make war against the children of Israel. Well, without looking into that whatsoever, and just taking like what the world says on face value,
right?
You would think like, oh, they're talking about this land mass in the Middle East that's only been named that since 1948. You know, they're not, and it's just they've muddied the waters.
Yeah.
And pretty much of what they've done.
Right.
And to me, like, you know, that's not. It's really hard to find truth in muddy waters. You know, and like it's so therefore it's really hard to find Christ in muddy waters. You know, because if you can't find the truth. You know, like, yeah, we're fine. Like, there's a lot of Christians out there, you know, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not trying to condemn, like, modern Christianity or anything like that. But, like, all the churches have gone along with this in a way, either knowingly or unknowingly have gone along with this, you know.
Yeah, I think we're on board with you on that, too. I would go back to John chapter 8, though, and what we read earlier, because just a little bit further, if we read just a little bit further, Jesus says, if you are Abraham's children, not if you were, but if you are, because he says that they are, he says, if you are Abraham's children, then do the deeds of Abraham. Meaning, you know, start listening to what God taught Abraham about what it means to be his children. And then it says in verse 40, but he says, as it is, you are seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. This Abraham did not do, and you are doing the deeds of your father. And then they go on to say that. So I guess I'm totally with you, and I think churches have fallen into that trap that they're just like, hey, we're going to back Israel no matter what. And yeah. I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah, I agree, because that, you know, that's just setting, and you shouldn't back anyone anytime, no matter what, unless you know the full side of the story. You know what I mean? And like that's what they've done, is like they've kind of created this condition to where they almost guilt you. It's like, you know, oh, if you don't, then, you know, you're this word, or you're this, you know, you're that word.
Yeah.
You know, and mind you, all those words they're calling people, they were all invented in the last 100 years by like communism. Yeah. And that's another thing too that we'll get into next thing. The whole, like the word Bolshevik. I'm sure you're familiar with the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yep.
You know, well, the word Bolshevik is actually a Georgian word that translates to big Jew. So whenever you hear the word Bolshevik Revolution, in Georgian, the word Bolshevik translates to big Jew. So it literally translates to the big Jew revolution that killed 90 million Christians in Russia.
Wow. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not gonna. I don't push back on that either. It's yeah.
You know, it's almost like communism might be the religion, like Lucifer's earthly religion. You know, because if you look at the rise of this neo-communism that's pretty much engulfing the earth right now. Like, I don't know if you guys like software, for instance. I've noticed this on, if you agree your software agreement now, guess what? You don't own it. You own nothing. You have permission. You have a license to use it. That's what you bought for that money. You bought a license to use this product.
Right.
Licenses can be revoked. You know, and
Sure.
It's coming to a point to where if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, you're revoked on all levels. All your licenses are going to be pulled from everything. Yeah. And that's what it pretty much, like, that's what I mean. But if you look in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you will not find the word license anywhere in those documents.
Right.
Because the license has been invented since then, since the conception of this country. And they push all this through like executive orders or legislative acts. Like the word acts is just a shortened word for action. They do all this stuff without, they're not getting the people's consent on it. Like in order for law to become law in this country, it has to be voted on by all the states. And they haven't done, the only thing to ever be voted on by all the states was the Bill of Rights. Therefore, technically, it's the only real law in this country.
Yeah.
And they violate it every chance they get. They never even teach you the Bill of Rights in any level of school.
Right.
Nor do they mention it on TV.
Right. So real quick, Brandon is in the room. He just came in. Brandon's good to have
the
you.
game.
Yeah. You were you at work late? Is that what's going on?
I was, yeah.
Okay. All right. So Brandon, you're kind of chiming in, shaking your head a little bit while we've been talking. We've had a show on this a few months ago or whatever, and we've talked about this, that we don't just necessarily back up nations or people groups because they say they're Jewish or whatever.
Yeah.
So we're cool with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So real quick, Brandon, you've just been kind of listening in. So we started to go down the Canaanite history, and Marshall started in, and then as usual, I butted in and took us down another path. So, Marshall, if you want to bring us back to some more history of the Canaanites, and we can walk through some more things and talk a little bit more about that, that would be good.
For sure. But Brandon, I also want to point out, I think we may have had quite a revelation too through those discussions. Because first it was brought up of the slave of slaves, and then in John chapter 8, straight up says we're all slaves to sin. Yep. So maybe that is maybe they run in parallel to each other. Yep. We're all slaves to sin, but the Canaanites are the slave of slaves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I kind of brought this up too, and I don't know if it goes with anything. In Romans chapter 6, it says, "Don't let sin master you, but it's by God's grace that you're not under the law no more," basically. So that's kind of cool too.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, because, in all this stuff, like everything we're discussing, last time, this time, every Thursday you guys meet. It's always like, that's why I have Romans 12:2 tattooed on my right hand. It's because all this is about the evolution of the mind. It's about every time you learn something new, your mind changes, your perception on the world changes, and that's a good thing. It's a great thing. And as long as it's always pulling it closer and closer to God, and that's why it says, do not be conformed to the world, but ye be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And the only way to renew your mind is by introducing new information to it.
Okay. So I'll just jump in real quick.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So if you are going to introduce new information, though, the question then becomes, where are you getting that information? Because he says, don't be conformed to the world. And then in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, the wisdom of this world is foolishness.
Yes.
So I think we have to be very careful that we're not getting what we call wisdom or we call renewing of our mind. I think we have to be very careful that we're not getting it from the world or from a history book or from a YouTube channel or from someone else, but that we're getting it from, the Word
Scripture.
of God.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
But there are things like, that can that you can see, like for instance, even like Enoch, if people didn't know about the book of Enoch or never were privy to that, if like they never found the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1945, then, there wouldn't be, everyone that did read those books, it kind of gives you a larger perception on these 66 books, And in my opinion, everything does, as long as you're using some sort of like spiritual discernment,
Yeah.
Because, there's going to, even throughout history, like if history and scripture coincide and they run in parallel to each other, then then you're on the right path, And as far as like, the teachings of the world and like what to look for and what not to look for, I think of it like this: whatever the mainstream consensus is telling you, like for instance, like
do the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. Do the exact opposite.
I'm with you.
Yeah, whatever the world is telling you is good, it's most likely not good, and like that's what I mean. Like this information, bringing this information, like the world doesn't like this information. I've been silenced from many platforms for not, and this is before we had the DNA evidence of this, just from their actions, just trying to bring awareness to an audience about like the things that go on in these synagogues and to do with child and like the whole like the Matitza Papet like circumcision ritual and everything. They will send the FBI to your house and try to intimidate you. You know what I mean? Like that's how they do it. That's how they work.
Right.
They work off intimidation.
Right.
But okay, so on the next page here, so we have this one. If we go kind of click back to page 9 of the slides here, I don't remember why I put this from Jeremiah chapter 7, but I have Jeremiah chapter 7 in there.
Do you have a...
But I don't remember why I put it in there now that I'm looking at this stuff. But I basically have like some questions. I have like...
You want me to pull it up right now, Jeremiah 7, that one?
If you want,
the word came.
Yeah, if you want to, I don't remember. I must have saw something in it that had some parallels. Let me see here. Or we can just kind of bypass this because, like I said, I kind of brain farted on it, so I'm not really sure the relevance of it. But the links though on the PowerPoint beyond that one, I kind of just pose some questions. Why did the Canaanites sacrifice children? Did Ham rape Noah's wife? There's all these things. Like, for instance, the child sacrifice among Canaanites. So they would basically take and they would throw children into these like smoking altars, a ball that they and like the pit. It was basically like a heated pit, usually with fire in it. That was called a tophet. Then they would take the children, throw in this tophet while they were beating drums and everything, because they did this out in the wide open. Then they would take it and they actually started doing it in temples. So they're doing these actions in worshiping temples, which is insane. And then through it's very vague, and there's conflicting stories of how the Canaanites were stopped. Basically, the Israelites, the armies of Israelites through King David, pretty much kicked these guys' butts so bad on the battlefield that they went into hiding. You heard nothing about in the history for 900 years. Canaanites totally disappeared. 900 years later, in Lebanon, the Phoenician Empire shows up on the scene.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to point out, and then the capital of the Phoenician Empire was in Carthage, so the Phoenician Empire pretty much engulfed the whole Mediterranean.
Go ahead. I mean, we basically have this today, and then our wives are rubbing the feminine products on their face.
Why, for sure. Yeah, like most people don't know,
That's
but
true.
Like when you get circumcised, okay, the hospital takes that skin, that circumcision skin from that the infant skin, they sell it to a lab, make lots of money off of it. The lab then breaks it down, turns all the different collagens and the things like like those cells. They take those cells and they actually repurpose it in age-defying facial creams. And I have articles on this. And in California, guess who got mad about it? A group of rabbis got mad because they were butting in on their profits, because they're the ones profiting from it.
See, like for me, I know what my flesh feels about these people. And that's where we got to toe the line is ultimately it's not up to me to say whether or not they get the bullet.
And again, and again too, like
but my flesh would want to hurt these people,
right?
You know what I mean, or be against them,
right? But here's my thought. You say these people, and I get it because
these people, and that's anybody.
And you're talking about the woman who's putting the stuff on her face and then going out and cheating on her husband. I mean, that's the same. See, it's again like if we come back to the sin issue.
Well, yeah, in Romans it says all sin.
Right. So for me,
it's the wage of death, right?
Yeah, sin is the wage of death.
So I guess that's where I kind of struggle.
Right. And I guess to me, that's where we come to this place where we all need forgiveness of sin, because without Christ and without forgiveness of sin, there is no hope of eternal life. No matter no matter how bad or how good you think you are, there is no hope of eternal life apart from Christ. Yeah.
Yeah, and if, like for instance, if just miraculously one day, poof, all those people that were doing this, making these products, selling these products on the market, the labs doing the work. If all those people that were behind it all just vanished one day, how much you want to bet that all those type of practices would disappear? Because Christians would not be partaking in that type of, you know what I mean? They wouldn't lower themselves. They wouldn't put mammon on a pedestal above righteousness, and that's essentially what's going on here. They're putting money and mammon.
I agree.
Above doing the right thing.
Yeah,
Well, I would agree too. Go ahead, Brandon. I guess I was gonna say that's no different than the Super Bowl on Super Bowl Sunday. I was watching a broadcast, and they said that Super Bowl Sunday is the largest sex trafficking event in the world. It's the biggest day where they are literally bringing children in van loads.
But we all watch it.
But we all take part in it.
You know, I actually thought too, like, it's wild you guys bring this up. And, you know, I have no proof of this, nothing, but it just kind of like, it's one of those things you think about once you really see what the, you know, world is about. How I wouldn't be surprised if underneath those fields, they were sacrificing kids every time this touchdown scores. So you got the roar of 50,000 people cheering on the sacrifice. You know what I mean? You never know. You never know.
You don't know.
I mean, you know, and that sounds wild, but, you know, in 2016, 2017, I was telling people, like, there's an island that billionaires are basically being blackmailed on, you know, and it's all being run by the Israeli government. Like, you know, I was looked at like I was insane. There's people like, I mean, I lost a lot of work in that period of time, you know, people just, well, in a way, but once it all came out in 2019, you know, I was vindicated from it, you know, and unfortunately I didn't want to be right. I wish I was wrong, but it sucks I was right. It sucks they're doing it.
Yeah, and yeah, it does, and I would agree that there is still a spirit of demonic and satanic cult worship, but I guess my thought is that it's not just geared towards like what we would call Canaanite people.
No, for sure. I totally hear you. I mean, it's all their doors are open. They'll take it, any denomination, any race. You know what I mean? But in my opinion, it's just who's been behind it the whole time. You know, especially now that we can pinpoint, okay, these Jews and Arabs descend from Canaanites. We can pretty much draw a straight line from modern day today all the way back 7,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's always this element. You know, a part of it, either a part of it or actively or inactively a part of all of it. You know what I mean? And it's vague. It's vague until you do the research on it. Once you see the names and you're like, holy crap, all these people that are behind all this stuff, all the vice on the earth, they're profiting from and they're producing it.
Brandon, you got a thought?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask then, I mean, I know we've still been talking about the Canaanites, but can we go even further back, Marshall? Because I guess I want to probe a little bit more, because you talked about reaching back, 7,000 years. Would you take us back into the Garden of Eden? Because I know this is a thought that is prevalent among some groups of people. It's definitely not the conservative Christian view of what was going on in the Garden of Eden. But your view looks totally different. And I think your view then kind of creates a worldview that would then paint a certain group of people as descendants of like Satan's seed. Instead of sin being the culprit, it would be actually Satan's actual offspring because of the way you set up Genesis. So can you tell us how you interpret Genesis chapter 3 and the sin that was going on there? And then I'd like for us to look at the text and just see what we think.
Well, first let me lay a little foundation about that whole chapter. When you read it in English and you're, in these Bibles that were printed probably within the last 50 years, it says serpent. Okay. Yeah. The word serpent actually translates to split-tongued deceiver. So what they did is they take a noun and change it to a verb, and then they take a verb and change it to a noun. You know what I mean? And it's all through translation. And
you're talking about the Hebrew word nakash, right?
Well, nakash was the person himself, but it's the split-tongued deceiver, nakash. Yeah, as far as serpent goes. Okay. But it's a person, but it's also the action of what he's doing. You know what I mean?
Now, do you have and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you have a reference or any kind of Hebrew encyclopedia that refers to that? Because I've only seen the word nakash meaning its first representation is serpent, which obviously could be split tongue because serpents are split tongue if you were going to say that it was an actual serpent. But then the second thing that it could be referred to is the verb form, I think it is, that would be like light bearer or brilliance or something to do with shining brilliance. Which again would refer back to this spiritual entity, because in the Bible, these spiritual entities are always referred to as like beings of light or stars. There's all these different references to light when it's referring to these beings. So I don't know. And I know I'm probably putting you on the spot because you might not have the.
No, I do. Well, the program I use to study biblical scripture is called eSword. It's the sword of the Lord with an electronic edge.
Okay.
And, you have your Smith's concordances, your Strong's concordances. You can actually go and download other concordances. And then when you're looking at it, you look at, like, you click up here in the top window, there's KJV. But if you click the KJV plus, it actually breaks it down and it gives you every concordance number with definition. And then so you start, okay, so the fall, Genesis 3. Now the serpent, okay, which is H5175 in the concordance, Nakash. Now, but this word is from H5172. Okay, so it has a suffix.
Well, that's a root, right?
Yes,
correct.
the root of it. Okay.
All right.
And the primitive root is properly to hiss. That is a whisper, a magic spell. Generally to prognosticate. Comma, X certainly, comma, divine enchanter, comma, X enlightenment, comma, learn by experience, comma, X indeed. So these are all like different kind of where that word Nakash is rooted from.
Okay, so then this would make sense because it's exactly what he's doing. He's whispering to her. He's trying to get her to question whether what God said was true. He's trying to then he tries to say God did not say. So he tries to say God not only did God really say this, but you're not really going to die. And so he's exactly doing what the root word of that means. So I'm fine with that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and then as we get into Genesis 3:3, okay, and then but the fruit of the tree. Okay, so this word fruit. Okay, when we get into the word fruit, it's H4480. As this concordance number, and it's a properly a part of from or out of in any senses above. So it's just kind of like it's a very generalized thing, like this word fruit, properly a part of. Okay, so what's wild though is it's rooted. Okay, it has a root word. Okay, now this root is H4482. Okay, now when you get into this, what's wild about this is the root of this is men. It's M-A-N-E is how it's pronounced, mani. From an unused root meaning to a portion, a part. Hence, a musical chord, parted into strings. So it's just wild, like it's a stringed instrument. So it's just, once you start getting into this and you start breaking down these words, what the English language has really done is they've taken and turned it into a fairy tale. You know what I mean? They've turned the entire thing into this, like it reads like you're watching a Disney cartoon. You know what I mean?
Okay, well let me ask you a question though. Again, this is why context is important. So if that word were by itself, then maybe we could take it back to the root and say it's a stringed instrument. However, in the context, it says the fruit of the tree, which is in the middle of the garden. So we know that this fruit is from a tree. Now, I'm still not totally convinced that this is a literal tree. Okay, I think it still could be a metaphor for knowledge, experience, things that they're trying to. They are literally, instead of
like
letting
a different dimension.
Well, I don't know about dimension, but I think what it could be representing is the rebellion for them to take control of their life on their own instead of letting God manage their life. They decide that they want to know the knowledge and they want to be like God and they want to understand these things, so they think they can handle it and manage it themselves. So then they enter into this agreement with Satan somehow. Now, whether or not they actually ate a piece of literal fruit, that's one thing. But somehow they consciously entered into an agreement that said, we want to manage our own life. We don't want God to do it.
Yes.
Now, I think that whole scenario, either one of those, whether they ate real fruit or not, but that to me goes then, it comes into the rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament when you have this issue of sin, and constantly sin, transgression, iniquity is always this idea of missing the mark. God said this is the way you're supposed to live and act. You have not done that. You've rebelled against that. So that's I guess that's my concept there. So when you look at the context, I think it's pretty straightforward, and I don't think it's wise for us, I guess, Marshall, to take, and even if you go back to a root, it's fine to go back and look at the root only if the root gives us substantial information that in the context we could use it that way.
Well, I mean, I was just trying to make an example of the. I'm not so much so when we're talking about this sexual act that occurred. So you have this word that's beguiled. Okay, she said she was beguiled by the serpent, or Nakash. She was beguiled by the split-tongued deceiver, and they acawed together. You know, and the word akaw is eat, right? But the word akaw actually has a different. It's a little bit more elaborate than eat. You know, a lot of, like, there's more connotations that has to do than just like eat from a fruit. So my whole point is, like, I mean, I know what you're saying, but this all I want people to realize is the world is telling you, this is the world consensus, that they ate an apple. You know, and like, I just find it ironic. Like, you know, it's funny. Like Adam, men have an Adam's apple, right? And like, what is your Adam's apple? It's this corded instrument, you know. There's strings in it, you know. It vibrates, like it's a stringed instrument, and it's just wild that here we have this fruit reference to a stringed instrument. And once you start breaking down the Hebraic, you know, the Hebraic meanings to it,
Yeah.
My point is just don't take things on face value. If you really want to, you know, if you really want to know the truth, you gotta start digging deep, and you might not always be right, but I tell you what, you're gonna have a way further, better understanding of the topic from just digging in and just not taking things on the face value.
Right, and I'm 100% with you. But let me ask you a question then. How do you get, even if you take that word eat, because that word actually, it means to eat.
But burn up or consume, devour.
Okay, but once you take that word, then how would you personally then prove that what's happening there is that Satan, because I have a lot of issue with the context that Satan is now fathering Cain to Eve, because in the later verses it says that Adam knew his wife, and the word for knew or know means to have sexual intercourse with in the Hebrew, and then they had Cain. So did somebody miss something there, or because now all of a sudden in the context, whatever the serpent was doing with Eve, he didn't create a child with her. And then my second thought is this, that if he was trying to corrupt the seed, which I get the whole Genesis 3:15, your seed against her seed, there will be hostility between her seed and your seed.
Anonymity.
I get that, but then my second question is, okay, so then why do the homosexual act with Cain, or I mean with Adam? See, so for me the context doesn't allow for me to try and extrapolate the idea that the serpent and Eve had sex. So I get what you're saying. Like I want to dig for the truth too.
Yeah.
But I think when you're digging for that, you've really got to look at context.
Well, also in Genesis 4, okay, it said Cain took his wife and they left.
Right.
So where does wife come from?
I am 100% true. Yeah, you're right.
Because they didn't populate the earth until Genesis 5.
Right.
So, and then there's other books called like the Cave of Treasures that was supposedly written in like 115. Okay. It says like, and it puts where Adam and Eve were basically cast to the top of this mountain, and they lived on the top of a mountain. They had Cain, and Cain's twin was his sister, And then a couple years later, Abel and his twin was born, which was Abel's sister. And God came down and said, okay, to correct this, Abel, you marry Cain's sister, Cain, you marry Abel's sister, and everything will correct itself. And when they were all walking back up to the cave on the top of the mountain to have the wedding, that's when Cain slew Abel. And then they kicked Cain and his sister out so they went off and lived in the plains and populated and made, a bunch of them. And then they stayed separate until the time of Jared. And it wasn't until I think Jared was like the sixth generation of the Adamites. That's when they actually came off the mountain and started mingling with the Canaanites. And then it says like the Canaanites were casting spells on them with musical instruments, and all this stuff, and like how, and like it's just wild to, then, they have this fruit. I don't know. Yeah. There's just so many,
I'm with you.
Kind of get me on the spot about it, and believe me, I mean, if I'll have something prepared for next week that kind of helps support. That way, I'm not kind of jumping around to find all this stuff.
No, and I'm with you about digging deep. Like I think you definitely have to. But I guess I just want to suggest and keep I guess pushing against you, because I think that my job is to encourage people that when they're searching for truth, make sure that it's the truth that you're getting. And when it comes to scriptures, you've got to look at context. And so even the extra biblical text that you just mentioned, that text from somewhere got the idea that Adam and Eve were still the ones that were procreating Cain and Abel.
Yeah, for sure.
So the idea then that somebody else has that somehow the serpent had sex with Eve, not only does it not make sense in the context of the biblical story, you've got other stories that don't show that. So maybe you have one extra biblical text that decides they want to portray this as the serpent having sex. But if you're looking for truth, then you've got to come to the conclusion that someone's got to be wrong. So is it the biblical text that's wrong in the context of what's going on, or is it, the other one?
Well, that's what I mean. It's hard because these biblical texts that we're given that are privy to us, I mean, I guarantee that the book of Genesis that you're reading in the modern day is a completely, like if we went back to the 1500s after Martin Luther led the Reformation of the church, the Bible he wrote for translated the Bible from the original Greek and Hebrew, I would guarantee it reads a lot different than this. It just, it's there's so much. It's a war. I mean, we're talking about a spiritual battle here.
Right.
So, of course, the liars, the thieves, and the murderers that are on the other side of all this, they don't care about changing some definitions of words. They don't care about muddying the waters of truth. As long as it helps pull people away from Christ, that's what they're really worried about.
Right.
And like I'm looking at it where I'm more worried about trying to bring people into Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like me, when I read that story as a teenager, I was like, this is a load of crap, and I feel a lot of people say that don't have God in their life, and it wasn't until I started pursuing the stuff of like, okay, well, if I thought there was something wrong with the Bible and that I'm searching and digging into it to try to uncover the things wrong with it, if that leads me to Christ inevitably, then isn't that a win?
No, I'm with you, dude. I'm with you. I guess I'm just saying, though, if it does lead you to Christ, though, I think it will, because of who Christ is, I think it will humble all of us to want to then be his ambassadors.
Why, sure.
To reach lost people. And so that's just where I kind of land on that.
Well, I totally agree. And but I mean, what's better than waking up people that are lost than telling them like, hey, you know what, there's a war against you and you may not even know it, but there are people out there that want to kill you and they don't know necessarily why. And you necessarily don't, you have no idea why, but they're coming, and like for instance, and I'd have to look this up, but I do believe in the book of Jeremiah, it gives a path to Lucifer's victory. And it's if he has to wipe out Israel off the planet. So if he can wipe Israel off the planet, then he wins. Now I'll find the actual verse and I'll dig into it a little more for next week or whatever. But now if that is the case though, and then, I mean, it all kind of plays into it, right? Like if Lucifer won, then in order for Lucifer to win, he has to wipe the genetic lineage of Israel off the planet. Now, and then what a better way of wiping them off the planet than by labeling a totally different people as Israel. It happens to be, ironically, the enemies of Israel historically are labeled as Israel in the modern day.
Yeah. Well, I think you're onto something in the sense of, I do believe that if you go back to the Old Testament, the whole giant clans and the Nephilim, every time you see Joshua, even David, when they're going against these clans and God's telling them to destroy them, it's always the people in the hill country, and the people in the hill country are always these giant clans. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, then there are still giant clans today, there are still those people, well, then it appears that in Revelation, that's when Jesus is going to return, and the great battle of Armageddon, or the battle against Gog and Magog, is going to be the battle where Jesus will come then, and he will take vengeance as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and then he will destroy them. And we will be with him in that sense. But until that day comes, I think, this is just me from the scriptures, it's clear that Jesus has given us a mandate, and that is to help people become students of his truth, and let that truth get them free. And I know you feel a call to explain to people that these people are coming to murder you, but if they don't get their heart right with Jesus Christ, it doesn't matter if they die of cancer or they die because these evil people kill them.
Totally, you're totally right. That's what it comes down to, and it even says in the book of Revelation, like, we are going to have a giant resurgence to Christ. There's going to be a huge move where huge populations will turn to Christ. And that's when the harvest is ripe. Mm-hmm. And it says 2 great sickles will reap the harvest. Mm-hmm. And like, that's the world. That's Lucifer and these earthly minions losing control. Mm-hmm. Everyone turning to Christ, so they got to drop the bombs. You know what I mean? And to me, when I see 2 great sickles reaping harvests, well, who uses a hammer and sickle on their flags?
Yeah.
Who are we about to most likely in the next 4 years be at some kind of world war with? Mm-hmm. These communistic, entities on this planet,
right.
Which are all, mind you, completely founded, funded, and orchestrated by Jewish people or Canaanites calling themselves Jewish people. And I have it. We'll get into that next week. I got even the Chinese. There Israeli backed the rise of all these communists. It's so apparent it's just so blatant. It's just wild. Like, they are truly the slave of slaves, and that slave is sin. And that is what a great, profound thing we found this week. That was awesome.
All right, all right. So anything else we want to share tonight? Brandon, you got any thoughts? Mm-mm. All right. Marshall, you want to add or just want to go one step further tonight? Or you got anything else you want to?
No, I mean, we covered, I guess next week we can kind of lead into, just take a couple quick minutes and get into, where was I with that PowerPoint here?
Do you want me to go back to?
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to kind of look real quick in the page we were at, I think 9 or something. Yeah, we can get into kind of like, next week we can I have, why were the Canaanites so evil? Why were the Edomites so evil? Does the Bible describe a future war between Israel and Edom? Why does God hate Edom? Because it clearly says in the Bible, God loved Jacob, but God hated Esau. Mm-hmm. And then we'll get into like the Phoenicians, because these Canaanites went to Phoenicia. They founded the Phoenician Empire. And once Carthage was totally ransacked and the Romans salted the earth, I mean, we can't even find where Carthage is to modern day. We'll get into like what the Phoenicians did. They were famous for making Tyran purple. Mm-hmm. And to this day, an ounce of this purple dye is $50,000 for 1 ounce. Okay, you have to kill 250,000 sea snails to acquire a few drops of this dye. So 1 ounce, you know how much death you have to cause on this planet to produce 1 ounce of this dye that was sought after by like for instance, you saw Hillary Clinton in that purple thing back in like 10 years ago.
And purple's always regarded as like a high
Royalty.
Because the Canaanites said so. Because they're the ones selling it to you.
Could be.
Yeah. Well, that's why though, is because it was this. No one saw nothing like that up until then. You know what I mean? That color didn't exist until then, like that royal purple, you know, and it caught the eye of royalty on the earth because no one else had it, you know. And the only person they ran the market on it. They had the market cornered on it. And then they ran copper and they ran other stuff, you know, and then the battle with Rome, we'll get into and they definitely worship Baal. Like there's like, I mean, it ties like Phoenicians to Canaanites because of their Baal worship. And not only that, DNA of like the times and what they found in modern day. And then we'll get into like something called the war, the Kittos War, where this is a quote by Cassius Dio. The Jews were destroying both Greeks and Romans. They ate the flesh of their victims, made belts for themselves out of their entrails, and dabbled themselves with their blood. In all, 220,000 men perished in Cyrene and 240,000 in Cyprus. And for that reason, no Jew may set foot in Cyprus today. And believe it or not, the Jews were kicked out of Cyprus in 117, and they were not allowed back into Cyprus until like the 5th or 6th century. So they were kicked out of Cyprus for over 400 years for what they did.
Right. And I guess, Marshall, I'm looking at this going, that's been the track record of God's people all throughout history. No?
I mean, I guess. I mean, but that's the thing, though, is like, in my opinion, as soon as those armies of Israel did not destroy everyone, like they disobeyed God's commandment, you know, and they only killed the men, they didn't kill the women and the children and the animals like God told them to. Mm-hmm. At that point, what did God do? He gave us the parable between the wheat and the tares in the field to sow the good seed. And then he went into the house and never to be seen from again. And at that point on, we were pretty much destined to suffer. You know what I mean? Like the whole like Jubilee years of 7 times 7 and like the 7 trials of Jacob and all this stuff. Like that's throughout history. For whatever reason, people like, if let's just say, for the sake of an argument, that Europeans are the true descendants of the lost house of Jacob, for whatever reason. And
you've traced this back, so you feel that that's true, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look up and the most prevalent one is the Danish people. I do believe it says in the Bible somewhere that the tribe of Daniel will retain their name throughout history. I can find that in the Bible. I do believe there's some sort of biblical reference to their name standing throughout the test of time. Okay.
And you link the Danish people to the
tribe
name
of Daniel. Yeah, because it's the Denmark before the vowels were added, you could put an E and an A and an I. All the vowels were interchangeable and they all meant the same thing. So Denmark, Danmark, it's all the same word. It's all meant the same thing. Not to mention genetically, they can trace Danes back to the tribe of Daniel. Just through linkage of like where they were throughout history.
But there was no tribe of Daniel, though, right?
Well,
the tribe of Dan.
Yeah, you have the Dan.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're not talking about, are you talking about Daniel in the book of Daniel?
Well, I'm talking about Daniel as one of the tribes of Israel. He was one of Jacob's sons, Dan.
Dan, not the Daniel of the book of Daniel, though.
No, this is the tribe.
You're talking about the tribe of Dan.
Yeah, one of the 12 tribes of Jacob.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean the name is the most.
And what makes that tribe?
The name is what stood out to me. Is just like
okay. And what makes that tribe, Dan, more special than any other tribe?
Well, because ironically, Dan is a brood of vipers, as described by his father, as the end of Genesis, and Jacob was giving out his blessings to his 12 sons.
Yeah.
When he got to Daniel's blessing was, you are a brood of vipers. Like that nice blessing to come from your father. But what's wild about that is because, okay, so if like, and there's other references to like the stone of Scrone and all these other things that go up through like European history, you know, from biblical sources. There's even people out there, and like this is a whole nother topic in itself, but there's actually something called like they believe there's a group of people mostly in Great Britain that believe like the whole thing, like Jerusalem was in Scotland. Like the whole thing in the Middle East is just an entire fake narrative. The whole thing actually took place in Scotland. But I don't necessarily believe that, but I do believe like that through the merger, like once Jerusalem was sacked, the tribes of Israel spanned out through the world. Now, in my opinion, the word Viking, you have this Roman numeral 6 kings travel north to the northern lands. Daniel being one tribe of Daniel, they land on what's called Denmark to this day. If you go back to, there's something called, I forget the name of it, so the Declaration of Abora. It's like the 12th century in Scotland. Like the Scottish Declaration of Independence, they admit that they're the true descendants of Judah. Like they are the true Judeans on the planet. So if that's the case, you have this Pharez and Zerah, which are the sons of Judah. Like there's just many sources out there that point that one son is the Germanic Teutonic order, like that's where they originated from.
Okay.
That basically founded Rome. Because that's another thing. Rome was actually founded, they found founding blocks in Rome 1,000 years before the blocks that they found in Italy. So Rome was set actually in Germany 1,000 years before we were taught Rome was founded.
And so I don't think we here on this show would disagree that there's a lot of history that we don't understand and that has not been written about or that we don't know about that was before that. I guess I'm just trying to make the connection, and maybe we can do that a little more next time you're on, that we could make the connection, because I guess I don't see if God has from Jacob his sons, and then those are the tribes of Israel, and God has called Jacob's people to be his portion, and that through them he would bring Messiah. And then the Messiah comes, and the Messiah shows up, and it's very clear, according to Paul's writings, that in Galatians, now that Messiah has bridged the gap, that there is no more Jew or Gentile, there is no more slave or free, there is no more male or female. That's in Galatians. But Christ is, he's the end to all of that. And so now in Christ, all nations go all the way back to Abraham in chapter 12. God said, I'm going to make you a great nation, and I'm going to bless all the families of the earth. And the blessing would be Christ, so that we could be saved through Christ. Yeah. So if that's the case, then I guess I'm trying to see the connection that you have with what's so special about Danish people, I guess.
Well, I'm not even, there's nothing special. I'm just saying that that's the one that's most prevalent to make that connection to a tribe, one of the 12 tribes. But actually, if you go through, like, there's linkage, like, for instance, the red cord, right? Like in Ireland, there's this, like, they're all through the ancient architecture and everything, there's, like, this hand, and it's even the flag of North Ireland. It's a white hand with a red line around it, and that goes back to when Pharez and Zerah were born, and the bridge that needed to be gapped. That's why Christ had to come back to bridge that gap, is because the hand came out of the womb first. The hand being tied the red cord around the wrist. Then the hand went back up and the brother came out. Okay?
Yeah.
So everything got messed up right there somehow. I don't know why. Something would, what's the word, progenity, like who gets the birthright,
Right.
right one to the birthright. Yeah, so that Pharez and Zerah, and then the Messiah came down through that line of Pharez and Zerah.
Yeah.
Which was Judah's sons.
Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree. Okay. And everything you said is correct. But there's one thing you're leaving out, though, is the people that don't follow Christ don't look at the world like that. They are going, and they actually they follow the old ways. You know what I mean?
Right, but aren't you one of those? Didn't you used to be one of those people?
Well, I would just an ignorant atheist, a victim of the society that these constructors of it had already set up.
So you don't think that your sin was your willful act. You don't think you freely chose to rebel against God. You think you're a victim.
I did freely choose. Well,
Okay.
I did freely choose, but if the world, that's why I think that's honestly why these Canaanites are allowed. Why, like, obviously, if God knew that Israel wasn't going to destroy him, he's omnipresent. He can see the future.
Right.
Most likely, these people are here to bring the sin on the earth to
Right.
test the rest of us. You know what I mean? In a way, like, they're the purveyors of the sin and the producers and the profiters of it.
So
If God didn't want this sin to be on the earth, then they wouldn't be committing it. You know what I mean? They are there to put sin in front of your plate, to put it in your lap, and it's up to you to put, you know what I mean, to either to give into it, to partake in it, or to turn your back against it. You know what I mean? Because without them there producing the sin, people would still sin, but it wouldn't be. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say anybody can be a vessel used to do that.
Yeah.
Through a demonic entity.
Yeah, and just their whole structure is the antichrist structure of their religion. So it pretty much sets anyone into that. It sets them up to be a vessel for that, you know, because their entire earthly structure, unless they're born again Christian, is godless.
but you don't need to be possessed by a demonic entity to sin.
Well, no, you don't. But I mean, what is demonic possession? You know, I mean, that's another thing. You know, like, did you know the very first?
Well, it just means to be under the control or the influence of.
Well, like, for instance, I know a schizophrenic, right?
Okay.
And he hears voices in his head
So do I.
that tell him they're basically telling him to kill people 24/7.
Oh, I don't hear
and
those.
they're telling him how to do it.
Okay.
So, like, to me, like, when I heard that, then I started doing some research into schizophrenia. The very first case of schizophrenia was actually a Jewish person. First case of schizophrenia.
Where do you? All right, hold on. Where do you find this stuff?
Dude,
How do you link everything back to Jewish people? I don't get this.
Because I get the question. I'm like, man, I wonder. I was like, schizophrenia.
But if you look that up, aren't you going to find that? Like, if you go to Google,
it's a guy's name. It's a guy. You look up the first case of schizophrenia, and it's a guy's name, and it's a very Jewish name. And then you look up the guy. You look it up. Was this guy a Jew? Like, and it says, yeah, he's born Jewish.
all right.
You know, and
go
that's
ahead.
just that's. I mean, maybe that's just how I search things. You know, I'm like, you know, if like, okay, this guy's doing something super evil, I wonder if he's a Jew. Then I look it up, and then, you know,
Yeah.
well, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. You know,
Okay,
But I just like that's kind of like how I grade.
Yeah.
You know, where
I guess I'm just trying to get people to admit the fact that they don't need Satan, and they don't need demons, and they don't need to feel like they're a victim of the political system or the power to sin. That we are willful constituents of doing our own rebellious things against God. And until we can admit that and then confess that before God, I don't think any of us can be technically saved, because the idea then is that we're just people kind of walking through this whole life trying to find knowledge and information, not realizing that God is the creator of all things, and he holds all wisdom and all knowledge. And therefore, if I want to understand or have ultimate knowledge, I need to submit myself to the will of the creator of the universe. And I think you have to at least be honest with yourself and say, I'm a rebellious sinner against God, and I don't need Satan's help or anybody else's help to do that.
yeah, I hear you, but you know, like, that's the thing, is like a lot of like.
I think that's where you and I differ.
Well, yeah, because I think the scriptures are very clear. James tells us it's not the devil that carries you. You're carried away by your own evil desires.
For sure.
Yeah, but where's that come from?
It doesn't matter where it comes from. You still rebel against it. You still do it.
Yeah, but I rebel against it how, though?
What do you mean? You make a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
Evil.
one twists your arm though.
Yeah, well,
No one twists your arm
Well,
to do
who
it.
taught you to be evil? How did you learn these evil ways?
Yeah, this is where you and I differ
Okay,
a
let's
little
go-
bit on that.
All right, well, let's go back to the Bible. It's very clear that when Adam and Eve sinned, sin now has been given down. It's genetically, if you want to say that, it's genetically been transferred from our father and mother, Adam and Eve, to all generations. So all people then have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And if you look at the word sin in the Old Testament or the New, it means to miss the mark. Yeah. So the idea is that God has a standard here, and he says this is right and this is wrong, and we're like, okay, we're going to do the wrong instead of the right. And until we submit ourselves to him and find forgiveness through his son Christ, we can't get free from that stuff.
But once you submit, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brandon. Go ahead.
I think that sin is it's obviously spiritual though.
Yeah, but it manifests itself in how you live or act. Then it will manifest itself in bodily actions.
Yeah, but where does that come? Where does that thought, that intrusive thought, come from?
The human heart.
Because of a spiritual evil
That
was
okay. So
implanted long ago.
But it's not like it was implanted. It's not like it's a person or a thing. It's a rebellion.
Yeah, it's a evil force against you. That's how I kind of look at it.
Yeah, here's the way I would say it. It's an evil force that you have freely chosen to be a part of.
Correct. Yeah.
So I'm with you. There is an evil force out there. I agree.
Yeah.
But it's definitely an evil force that we have chosen to be a part of.
I agree.
Well,
okay.
Another thing too is like, I think, and a lot of this is just because the immense push of like Catholic teachings, even in non-Catholic churches. But the Bible says that once you accept Christ as your Lord and Savior, you are saved. He knows you're going to sin. And as long as you acknowledge that and strive to not sin, that's what I mean. I feel like the church wants to guilt you into you should be so ashamed because you sin so much. And to me, I don't like that. I don't like that kind of take on it. I look at no, God loves us. We're his children. He wants us to turn towards him, and another thing about these pitfalls, it's right in Revelation, I think 2:9, where it says, I have a few things against thee, because he's talking about these Jews who say they're Jews and are not, or the synagogue of Satan.
Right.
He's like, I have a few things against thee. You cast a stumbling block in front of the children of Israel, making them eat things sacrificed unto idols and commit fornication. Mm-hmm. So what's getting eaten that's we sacrifice on idols, and what we just looked at, it's just, there's human DNA in all these fast food joints, and then you got this practice of a child sacrifice throughout history, and you start looking up how much meat, you would be shocked, just the meat, how many hamburgers McDonald's sells in in one day. Okay, and that's just McDonald's, and that's just hamburger. We're not talking about the quarter pounder. We're not talking about all the other meat, quote unquote, beef selections they have to choose from. And that's just one fast food joint. And you're talking about now you got Burger King, Arby's, all these other fast food joints, not to mention the steak and stuff you can go buy from the store. Mm-hmm. If you do the math on this stuff, there's not enough cows on the planet to feed the masses of people the amount of beef through those fast food joints.
Mm-hmm.
It's just mathematically impossible.
Yeah.
So
Brandon, you were gonna.
Oh, God.
I got something for you. Yeah. You're walking through the woods, and you go to the train trestle.
Yeah.
Something tells you to jump off.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not you. Or is it you?
Well, I have the choice to jump off or not, though.
Correct.
Right.
But where does that come from?
No, I'm with you 100% that there is spiritual forces that are at work. Ephesians chapter 6 is very clear of that. What I'm saying is that we are responsible as human beings for our own sin. And we can't try to justify that
and blame it on blame it.
Yeah, we can't put the blame on the Jews, or we can't put the blame on the Canaanites, or we can't put the blame on demonic beings. We still have a choice.
Yeah, we have a choice to make. I'm just saying that there's
A stumbling block that's been cast before us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but Jesus is warning that you do not be the stumbling block. He's not saying
yeah, he don't want you to fall into it.
no, but when he's making those statements, he's telling people that they're being the stumbling block, and that's the problem with who they are. They are the stumbling block.
Well, but he's specifically talking to the Jews in that part of Revelation chapter 2.
Right. So even in Revelation 2, so if you go back to John 8, why did he speak so strongly to these Pharisees that he clearly says you are ethnically Abraham's children, but you're trying to kill me? So again, that goes back to like, and I understand what you're saying, Marshall, too, because I am not a person that wants to lay heavy burdens on people's backs, because I will be the first one to admit that I fall short and sin on a regular basis. Okay,
so, exactly, me too.
But I think it's very clear in the scriptures that Jesus is calling his children to become his students. And when I say students, I don't mean just trying to get a lot of knowledge, but students of how to live life. That's why he preached the Sermon on the Mount. That's why he taught the things that he taught, because you or myself or Brandon, we become a stumbling block if we have hate in our heart, or if we are adulterous, or if we decide it's okay to watch porn, and it's not that big of a deal, and so then somebody else decides, hey, that's not a bad thing, and then Jesus looks at us and goes, hey, that's adultery and that's sexual perversion, and I don't want you to be a part of that. So I think every Christian then, once they become a follower of Jesus, the goal then is to become his imager, which he created us. And you can't become his imager unless you are becoming his student, so that you can learn from him and let his spirit change and transform you. And for me, that's where I really push, because that's literally, to me, that's the gospel. That's where I rest. Because if a person's life is not being transformed by Jesus, and you're not becoming more like him, then I think you need to reevaluate whether or not he's really your king.
Yeah, and but let's analyze his whole body of work, though. He's everything you've said he has done. Yes, and he said it, but he also has gone into these temples where these Pharisees were lending money out,
right,
and he's taken a bullwhip to them, and he's flipped the tables over. They were basically turned his house of worship into a bank and into a loan house.
Right.
So he whips him with bullwhips and starts flipping the tables over. That's something Jesus did too, but it's not something that, it doesn't fit like the common, like, it just feel like the modern idiom of churches has turned Christ into like this hippie communist in a way. You know what I mean?
Soft.
Yeah, soft. Exactly.
I'm cool with making Jesus a little more hardcore.
Yeah.
Like I believe he was, but again,
That's the thing. I think he was hardcore.
I do too. But it's interesting though. Like you can't have, like everybody wants a God that's either hardcore or, love. Everything's love.
But he's both.
He's both. Yeah. Exactly.
That's what's awesome about him.
Yeah. All right. Well, man, we've had some throwdown, good discussion here.
Yeah, this was good. This was great. I thought it was good, and I think anyone watching it would probably they're going to take something away from it.
I would hope so. Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah. All right. Well, Marshall, if you get permission,
ask the boss when I get home. If not next week, it'll be a week after, because Rachel works next weekend.
Okay.
Next week she's got to work both days, so we'll see how it goes. The following week, though, she won't work on Thursday. She works every other Thursday.
Okay.
She just had 2 in a row off because just things with like scheduling. And
okay.
So.
All right. Yeah, because I would like for us to maybe even expand a little more on this idea of like what's going on in modern day like Hollywood and the financial markets and the political system and all this stuff that's going on, because I think that not to label necessarily a group of people, but to look at a characteristic of a sinful group of people that are out there in the world. And I'm all about that. Like, if you want to take the cover off of sex trafficking, then hey, let's do it.
Yeah.
If you want to take the cover off of people abusing, other things, let's do that.
Because we can classify all those things up in one phrase. They're the fruitless deeds of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and then we're exposing them.
Right.
You know, and all those actions are the fruitless deeds of darkness.
Yeah.
You know? And like, and then we can just, instead of, you know, we don't even have to, once we get through this whole, I'm pretty sure we've established at this point, like, the Jewish Canaanitic genetic relationship. So I mean, from this point on, we can pretty much just classify them exactly like the Bible does, and just it's the synagogue of Satan. Because at this point, its members aren't all Canaanites. You know, anyone can work for the synagogue of Satan, and you don't have to necessarily be, you know. It's more about mammon at this point. It's more about like just trying to get that like financial and social stature and doing whatever it takes to get there. And they got an entire system and an entire chain of islands to take you to work yourself up, you know, up the levels of echelons of human stature in the world that they've created. So that'll be good.
Okay. All right. And that's all the kingdoms of the world.
Yeah.
Not just the Jewish people.
No, it is. But you know, unfortunately though, like we get into like the modern day, and there's always like a Jew in the pile.
I tried to hold it together.
But yeah, no, I agree. Like we'll you know, I'm not just gonna we'll pinpoint everyone, and then if they're Jews, they're Jews, and if they're not, they're not. I just have a feeling that as we go through this list, like about 95% of them are Jews. You know, that's just the way it is. I'm not trying to be biased on it. I'm just trying to report the facts as they are.
And yet at the same time, they're not Jews.
Exactly. They say they are.
They're the synagogue of Satan.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. And this is the conundrum. See the conundrum?
Yeah.
It's like layers of an onion.
Right. But I'm still not on board. I'm still not on board that the true Jews are Danish.
No, I didn't say. I'm just saying that the tribe of there's 11 other tribes of children of Israel.
Right.
It's just that, you know, the Dans went there. I mean, even look at the word Saxon, right? Like Anglo-Saxon. The word Saxon. What's wild about the word Saxon is if you put an I in front of it, it becomes Isaac's son or Isaac's sons. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like, there's just all these like.
Well, I know, but if you put phone at the end, it's saxophone.
Well, I know.
So
what
do you?
No, I'm just saying though, like, and I'll compile some stuff on it. I
Okay.
just, in my opinion, like that's America is. You know, the gathering of Israel of Israel regathered as the gathering place, and Israel is regathered in each and every one of us Europeans. We're all Euromutts. We all have all 12 tribes of Israel in our blood, and probably others. You know, and we all are so mudded up at this point. It's just that's why it comes down to what you do, your personal actions, and you know, probably back when the blood was pure, it was probably more cut and dry. Like, well, obviously the Adamites aren't going to sin because they're pure blood, and the Canaanites are going to only sin because. But now it's so mixed up that the choice. You know, it's all personal choice at this point.
So we can talk about this next week. But so you're saying there was a race of people that at one time were pure and they didn't sin?
No. See, you're correct. No, because they right from the garden they sinned. But I'm just saying, like, you have this, you got Adam, like this, it says right in the book, this is the, you know, and this is where our differences, you know, this is the generations of the guinea of Adam, you know. So therefore the Adamites, because right in the book of Chronicles, it doesn't say Cain, the Adam's line starts at Abel. Or not Abel, I'm sorry,
Seth.
At Seth.
Mm-hmm.
There's no mention of Cain as being Adam's offspring in the book of Chronicles.
Right.
You know, so it's like, I mean, there's just so much gray area about that whole thing that, I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, but to me, it's like I just want to know, like,
Okay.
is it you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
why hide it? If it's not a big deal, why hide it? Same with like,
Okay.
you know, why the modern Jews calling themselves Jews or Judea when they're Canaanites? Like, if it's not a big deal, then why are you lying about it? You know what I
Okay.
mean? Why all the deception?
Okay. And then too, as we look across the world, if we do find all of the 12 tribes and we were to find all those people, I mean, ultimately, Romans tells us, Paul tells us that we're all grafted in, and technically it doesn't matter where you're from. if you're in Christ, now you're grafted into Christ, and now you are a Jew, according to Paul, like not ethnically a Jew,
but a Judean by tribe.
Yeah, yeah.
You're becoming a church of the body of Christ.
Yes,
Like,
correct.
In the beginning, like the church of Christ wasn't a place of brick, stone, or mortar. It was just a group of people, you know.
Well, Marshall, I tell you what, after this last 2 hours, I don't know if anybody else online has felt any better, but I feel much better about our conversation tonight than maybe yesterday, or I mean last week, because we were kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
So I do feel better about that. And we are going to agree to disagree on some things, obviously, but okay.
And the fact that we can do that and still have a very constructive, you know, cordial, like, discussion about it, it just shows you, like, you know, like, you know, we're just trying to seek the truth. That's all.
Yeah.
Not trying to hurt people's feelings.
Yeah. All right, cool. Okay, well, Brandon, anything else before we get out of here?
Nope.
All right, well, I'll tell you what. You guys have a great rest of your weekend and enjoy it. And don't forget to subscribe again. I got to tell you that as many times as I can. Subscribe, because it does help the algorithm. And make sure that if you do like the videos, make sure you share them with somebody. So you guys have a great weekend, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.